Today, we're exploring the most horrifying last minutes of people mauled by wild animals. From thrill seekers who ignored safety warnings to families whose dream vacations turned into nightmares when mechanical failures and human error transformed rides of joy into machines of death. It was November 9th, 2016, in the Australian bush, a land infamous for its hazards. Here, danger didn't always roar or growl. Sometimes it lay hidden underfoot. Venomous spiders wove webs across walking tracks. Kangaroos could turn aggressive if approached, and saltwater crocodiles waded in rivers and billabongs. But among Australia's predators, few were as deceptively deadly as the death adder. Unlike most snakes that slither away at the first hint of danger, the death adder stays perfectly still. It buries itself under leaves, grass, or loose soil, its pattern blending seamlessly with the forest floor. It doesn't come looking for you, you come to it. And when you do, you're already in its strike zone. 42-year-old Mark Turner knew the bush better than most. Born and raised in Queensland, he had grown up exploring creeks, fishing in remote streams, and camping beneath eucalyptus trees. Friends often joked he was part kangaroo, agile, comfortable, and completely at home in the wilderness. On this day, he'd set out for a solo bushwalk near the Sunshine Coast, keen to enjoy a quiet afternoon before summer's heat became unbearable. The walking track he chose wasn't popular. It wound through dry eucalyptus woodland, the ground littered with brittle leaves and fallen branches. The smell of warm earth mixed with the faint tang of eucalyptus oil in the air. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots and the occasional call of a kookaburra echoing through the trees. It was late afternoon when Mark decided to take a shortcut. He spotted a faint, narrow trail veering off the main path toward a creek bed he knew well. It would shave 20 minutes off his walk, he thought. But this trail was different. No clear edges, just patches of leaf litter and sun-bleached twigs, the kind of cover in which an ambush predator could vanish completely. Just a few steps in, it happened. Something sharp and heavy clamped onto his lower leg with shocking force. The strike was so fast, his brain barely processed the movement. He looked down and saw it, a thick-bodied snake, short-tailed, its triangular head still buried in his calf. The scales were mottled brown and gray, perfect camouflage for the bush floor. The death adder released almost instantly, retreating only a few inches before coiling again, head raised, ready to strike a second time. Mark's heart pounded. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and exactly what that meant. Death adders are among the fastest strikers in the world, capable of hitting in less than 0.15 seconds. Their venom is a potent neurotoxin that attacks the nervous system, paralyzing muscles, including those that control breathing. Without treatment, death can come in just a few hours. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the snake. His backpack slid from his shoulders into the dirt. For a brief, irrational moment, he thought about sucking out the venom, but a memory from a long-ago first aid course stopped him. That was a myth. What he needed was to keep the venom from spreading. His hands shook as he tied his shirt around the bite, hoping to slow the venom, but the real problem was getting out. The shortcut had seemed like a good idea minutes ago, but now it was a trap. He was more than a kilometer from the main track, with no cell signal and daylight slipping away. He started moving, forcing one foot in front of the other. Within 15 minutes, the feeling in his leg was gone, replaced by a deep, cold numbness. By 30 minutes, he noticed his tongue felt thick, his speech slurred, though there was no one there to hear it. His arms began to feel heavy, his steps uncertain. When Mark didn't return, his wife called a friend, who found his car at the trailhead and alerted emergency services. The search team found him just 200 meters from the main trail, lying on his side. His eyes were open but glassy, his limbs unmoving. His breathing was shallow, skin pale and clammy. Paramedics worked quickly, administering anti-venom on the spot before rushing him to a hospital in Brisbane. Later, doctors confirmed the bite had delivered a full envenomation, enough venom to kill an adult in less than 6 hours without treatment. Mark had been lucky, very lucky. He spent days in intensive care on a ventilator as the neurotoxins slowly worked their way out of his system. Even after the paralysis faded, he needed weeks of rehabilitation to regain muscle strength. These harrowing encounters show that snakes, whether massive constrictors or venomous ambushers, are masters of their craft, perfectly evolved to kill with terrifying efficiency. From dense jungles to rural farmlands, they strike without warning, reminding us that in the wild, survival is never guaranteed. Every victim's story is a sobering testament to nature's raw power, and to the fact that even the most experienced or cautious can fall prey when the hunter becomes the hunted. It was March 18, 2014, and a regional wildlife park outside New York City showcased its newly completed tiger habitat beneath the professional lighting equipment that photographer David Park had spent the morning setting up. The 42-year-old freelance photographer had been hired to capture promotional images for the park's marketing campaign, his portfolio of wildlife photography making him the ideal choice for highlighting the impressive Siberian tigers in their new enclosure. The late winter afternoon provided ideal lighting conditions for the dramatic shots that would support the facility's conservation messaging. David had built his reputation on patience and technical skill, often spending hours waiting for a moment when an animal's natural behavior aligned perfectly with his camera's frame. His experience working in wildlife parks across the country had taught him to follow strict safety guidelines while capturing the power and presence of the world's most dangerous predators. The park's new tiger habitat featured multiple viewing areas and updated safety systems designed to give visitors immersive views while maintaining secure separation from the animals. The Siberian tiger habitat featured expansive outdoor areas connected to indoor holding facilities through a network of tunnels and corridors that allowed the massive cats to move freely while providing staff with safe access for feeding and medical care. David had been photographing through the reinforced glass viewing areas, capturing stunning images of the 400-pound male tiger as he moved through his territory with fluid grace. Siberian tigers are the largest cats in the world, with adult males weighing up to 660 pounds and measuring over 10 feet in length. These apex predators possess incredible strength, speed, and hunting instincts that make them among the most dangerous animals in any zoo collection. Their powerful jaws can crush bone with ease, while their razor-sharp claws and muscular build allow them to take down prey many times their own size. Even in captivity, Siberian tigers retain all their natural behaviors and territorial instincts. While reviewing his images, David noticed that a maintenance access door showed an incomplete latch from earlier repair work, leaving it not fully secured. His photographer's eye immediately recognized the opportunity for unique angles and perspectives that would be impossible to achieve from the public viewing areas. David believed the tiger was secure in its main enclosure, unaware of the connecting tunnel system that provided the big cat with access to multiple areas. David entered through the unlatched maintenance door, believing it was part of the approved staging area for his photography setup. The narrow service corridor provided access to various parts of the exhibit, while keeping staff separated from the tigers through multiple barrier layers. David positioned his equipment near a small viewing port that offered a unique angle he couldn't achieve from the public side. Unknown to David, the tiger had access to an adjacent holding pen via a tunnel, and a secondary holding gate had not fully seated after the morning cleaning routine, creating a gap large enough for the tiger to push through into the keeper access zone. The massive predator had been resting in the tunnel system when David's presence and the sound of camera equipment triggered his territorial instincts. The 400-pound Siberian tiger pushed through the misaligned holding gate and stepped into into the narrow keeper access area, his massive frame filling the confined space as he assessed the unexpected human presence. David turned from his camera setup to find himself face to face with 400 pounds of apex predator in a space barely wide enough for both of them. The tiger's massive head was less than 6 feet away, his amber eyes fixed on David with predatory intensity, while his powerful muscles tensed for action. David's camera equipment blocked his path to the exit door, while the tiger's position prevented any possibility of retreat. The tiger attacked with explosive power, striking David's chest and shoulders first and driving him against the concrete wall. Claws raked across his torso as the confined space amplified the impact, scattering his camera equipment across the floor. Once David was down, the tiger's powerful jaws clamped onto his head and neck, leaving him unable to escape. The attack was swift and driven by territorial instincts, the tiger reacting to an unexpected presence in its space. Zoo security responded to the emergency alerts within minutes, but the narrow corridor and the tiger's continued aggression made immediate intervention extremely dangerous. The veterinary team worked to tranquilize the massive cat, while other staff attempted to create distractions that might allow access to David's location. The tiger eventually retreated to his main enclosure, but David had already succumbed to his catastrophic injuries. The incident prompted an immediate shutdown of the tiger exhibit, while containment specialists and investigators conducted a full review of the holding systems and access points. The zoo implemented stricter access controls, reinforced door hardware, and revised contractor protocols to prevent unauthorized entry into restricted areas. David's death underscored the importance of maintaining clear separation between non-animal staff and the predators housed within the facility. It was March 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhoods of Phoenix, Arizona basked under the desert sun as Bobby Chen worked in his converted garage laboratory. The 34-year-old software engineer had transformed the space into an elaborate reptile facility, complete with custom-built enclosures and climate control systems that housed his secret collection of exotic venomous snakes. Bobby had been illegally importing venomous species for 3 years, building a collection that included 12 different species from around the world. His neighbors had no idea that deadly serpents lived just feet from their own homes, as Bobby had carefully concealed his hobby behind the facade of a normal suburban lifestyle. He had learned everything about snake care from online videos and forums, never receiving formal training in handling venomous species. Bobby worked as a senior developer for a major tech company, earning a substantial salary that funded his expensive and dangerous hobby. He had started with harmless species before gradually acquiring more dangerous specimens through underground networks and illegal wildlife dealers. His garage had been meticulously converted with temperature controls, humidity systems, and specialized lighting to accommodate species from tropical climates. His prize specimen was a massive gaboon viper from West Africa, a snake he had acquired through illegal wildlife trafficking networks. The snake lived in a custom enclosure that Bobby had built himself, though the habitat was inadequate for such a dangerous animal. Bobby's lack of proper training and equipment had created a disaster waiting to happen, and his habit of drinking beer while performing routine maintenance on his collection would prove fatal. Gaboon vipers are among the world's most dangerous snakes, possessing the longest fangs of any venomous species at up to 2 inches in length. They can inject massive amounts of venom in a single bite, with their cytotoxic poison causing severe tissue death and organ failure. Gaboon vipers are ambush predators with incredible striking speed despite their heavy build, and their excellent camouflage makes them nearly invisible when motionless. Their venom is associated with high mortality without rapid anti-venom administration. Bobby had been drinking beer while cleaning multiple snake enclosures, a routine he performed every weekend to maintain his collection. The alcohol had impaired his judgment and slowed his reflexes, making him careless around animals that demanded absolute precision and respect. When he reached the gaboon viper's enclosure, Bobby made the fatal decision to clean the habitat while the snake was still inside. Bobby opened the enclosure door and reached inside with his cleaning tools, believing the snake was docile enough to allow his presence. The gaboon viper lay coiled in the corner of its enclosure, perfectly camouflaged among the artificial plants and substrate. displaying the natural defensive behavior that made these serpents such effective ambush predators. The moment Bobby's hand entered the enclosure, the gaboon viper struck with devastating speed in a defensive response to the perceived threat. Its massive head shot forward, and the 2-inch fangs penetrated deep into Bobby's forearm, injecting an enormous dose of cytotoxic venom. Bobby screamed and jerked his arm back, but the snake had already delivered what would prove to be a fatal envenomation. Bobby immediately called 911, but his location in suburban Phoenix presented a unique problem. Identifying the exact species and locating appropriate antivenom would prove logistically complex and time-consuming. The exotic nature of his collection meant that standard snakebite protocols required modification, as emergency rooms needed to identify the specific species before determining treatment options. The gaboon viper venom began its devastating work immediately, causing massive tissue death at the bite site, while simultaneously attacking Bobby's internal organs. His forearm swelled to twice its normal size as the cytotoxic poison destroyed muscle, fat, and blood vessels. The venom's hemotoxic components began breaking down his blood cells, causing progressive bleeding throughout his body. Emergency medical personnel arrived within minutes and immediately began providing airway support, intravenous fluids, pain control, and continuous monitoring of Bobby's vital signs. They worked to stabilize his condition while frantically coordinating with poison control centers and herpetologists to identify the exact species and locate appropriate antivenom. Bobby was rushed to the nearest trauma center, where doctors continued supportive care while the antivenom was being located and transported. The delay in obtaining the specific antivenom, combined with the massive dose of venom Bobby had received, created a race against time that medical personnel ultimately could not win. Bobby died from hemorrhagic shock and multiple organ failure 36 hours after the bite, his body overwhelmed by the massive dose of exotic venom despite aggressive medical intervention. Police discovered his illegal collection during the investigation, finding 11 other venomous snakes in various stages of poor health. Bobby's death shocked his family and neighbors, who had no idea about his dangerous hobby. The case led to stricter enforcement of exotic animal laws and enhanced training for emergency responders dealing with unusual envenomation. His death also prompted hospitals in areas with known exotic pet ownership to develop better protocols for identifying and treating non-native snake envenomations. It was July 8, 2015, and the golden morning light filtered through the acacia trees of Hululua Imfolozi Park in South Africa as 21-year-old Isabella Cruz adjusted her phone tripod for the perfect shot to post on her Instagram. The ancient park, established in 1895, stretched across 96,000 hectares of rolling hills, river valleys, and sparse woodland patches in KwaZulu-Natal, representing one of Africa's oldest proclaimed nature reserves. Birds darted through shafts of sunlight, while distant termite mounds and small waterholes dotted the landscape, evidence of the intricate ecosystem thriving here. Isabella had been granted special permission for supervised vehicle-based visits as part of a sponsored collaboration with a fashion brand promoting ecotourism, but her pursuit of the perfect shot often clashed with the strict safety protocols that governed visitor access to this pristine wilderness. The guides had briefed her on the risks, emphasizing that guests must remain in vehicles at all times and that even herbivores could turn deadly if provoked. But Isabella's focus on content creation made it easy to overlook these critical warnings. Isabella had grown up in suburban Johannesburg, where her closest encounter with wildlife involved posing with giraffe feed at a safari park. Her passion for social media had developed during high school, but it wasn't until she began her influencer career that she discovered the attention garnered by striking, unconventional photos of exotic locations could become her signature. Brand managers praised her eye for aesthetics, but they worried about her tendency to push boundaries for content that would stand out from thousands of other influencer feeds. Friends often noted her meticulous attention to detail, every strand of hair, every wrinkle in a blouse. But those habits, while perfect for social media, sometimes distracted her from situational awareness in unpredictable outdoor settings. The morning's target was a white rhinoceros cow with her 6-month-old calf, a pair that had been frequenting the area near the Mpila camp for several weeks. Isabella had previously photographed them from inside the safari vehicle, capturing the encounters in polished, professional-looking shots. But those images, she felt, lacked the intimacy and drama that would ensure maximum engagement on her rapidly growing social media channels. She had even brought a secondary smartphone for slow-motion footage. And when the guide briefly stepped away to coordinate with another vehicle via radio, Isabella saw her opportunity. What Isabella didn't fully understand was that her pursuit of viral content placed her among some of the world's most dangerous animals during their most vulnerable moments. The park was home to both black and white rhinoceros species, with the white rhino population representing one of conservation's greatest success stories after being brought back from near extinction. However, this success had created new challenges as increasing populations led to more frequent human-wildlife encounters. Rangers often warned that the protective behavior of mothers with calves could be triggered in seconds, and the dense vegetation provided natural cover that could conceal an approaching threat. White rhinoceros are the world's second-largest land mammals, with adult females weighing up to 4,000 pounds and standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Despite their name, they are gray, with the term white derived from the Afrikaans word wide, meaning wide, referring to their square-shaped mouths adapted for grazing. These massive herbivores can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour when charging, using their prominent horns as formidable weapons when defending territory or protecting young. They have tough, thick skin, which provides protection from minor scrapes and predator attacks, but their sheer size allows them to inflict catastrophic damage to anything in their path. Mother rhinos are particularly aggressive during the first year after giving birth, viewing any approaching figure as a potential danger to their calves. Observers note that these charges are lightning fast and nearly impossible to escape if the rhino has already locked eyes on a target. The incident began when Isabella made the critical decision that would cost her life, quietly exiting the safari vehicle, while the guide was distracted and stepping onto the ground to approach the grazing rhino pair on foot. She had spotted them in a clearing about 50 meters from where the vehicle was parked, the morning light perfectly framing the scene for an Instagram story. Isabella advanced cautiously, her designer sandals crunching on the dry grass, believing her quiet movements would allow her to reach an optimal shooting angle without disturbing the animals. The rhino cow had already detected Isabella's presence when she first dismounted from the vehicle, the movement and unfamiliar silhouette catching the animal's attention. The cow continued grazing while monitoring the approaching human, her body language tense but not yet aggressive. Isabella managed to close the distance to approximately 40 meters before kneeling behind a small termite mound to steady her tripod, unaware that the rhino was already alert and assessing the threat level. Isabella began taking rapid bursts of video and photos, her movements becoming more animated as she adjusted angles and repositioned herself for better lighting. The combination of her continued forward movement, her upright human silhouette against the morning sky, and the shifting breeze that carried her scent directly to the rhino triggered the cow's defensive response. The rhino's head snapped up, ears pivoting forward, eyes locking onto Isabella's position with focused intensity. The cow's tail flicked in agitation, and she took several deliberate steps toward Isabella, displaying the full length of her horn. Isabella realized the danger too late. She stood and turned to run back toward the vehicle, but the sudden movement confirmed to the rhino that this was a threat requiring immediate action. The 4,000-pound rhino charged, her powerful legs propelling her massive body forward as she closed the distance in a few explosive seconds. Isabella managed only a few stumbling steps before the rhino was upon her. The rhino's massive shoulder struck Isabella from the side, the impact sending her flying through the air before she crashed to the ground. Before Isabella could attempt to rise, the rhino was over her, using her enormous weight to trample the perceived threat. The rhino's front feet came down on Isabella's torso with crushing force, the impact fracturing multiple ribs and causing massive internal trauma. A second strike caught Isabella's head. The force of 4,000 pounds concentrated through the rhino's foot, causing catastrophic skull fractures and cervical spine damage. The attack lasted less than 10 seconds, but the injuries were immediately fatal. The rhino stood over Isabella's motionless body for several moments, ensuring the threat was neutralized before returning to her calf. Her carefully curated outfit and accessories were scattered across the scene, her phone lying several meters away, where it had fallen during the initial impact. The guide, who had heard Isabella's brief scream and the sound of the charge, immediately radioed for emergency assistance and drove toward the scene. Rangers responding to the call arrived within 12 minutes, but Isabella was already dead, her injuries far beyond any possibility of medical intervention. Her phone was recovered several meters from the impact site, its casing cracked, with fragmented clips revealing her approach and the rhino's charge in stark, undeniable detail. Investigators confirmed she had violated fundamental park safety protocols by exiting the vehicle without authorization and approaching a white rhino cow with a calf on foot. The rhino's reaction was determined to be normal, defensive, maternal behavior, and the animal and her calf were left unharmed. Some online viewers debated whether her focus on content creation contributed to the tragedy, while others criticized the momentary lapse in supervision that allowed her to leave the vehicle. The rhino cow and her calf were unharmed, acting within natural instincts to protect her young. Isabella's death prompted immediate revisions to visitor rules. Photography permits now require continuous guide supervision, with guests prohibited from exiting vehicles under any circumstances near vulnerable wildlife, and influencers collaborating with brands must receive mandatory safety briefings with signed acknowledgement of protocols. Her family established a scholarship supporting young women pursuing wildlife and environmental education, ensuring her legacy endured in a constructive form. It was October 14th, 2017, in a residential neighborhood outside Sacramento, California. The finished basement had been converted into what appeared to be a professional reptile facility, with custom-built wooden shelving and sophisticated lighting systems. Carl Fleming was 38, a former warehouse supervisor who had become convinced he understood snake breeding after purchasing and memorizing a comprehensive 800-page reptile breeding manual written by European herpetologists. Carl had focused on the profit potential sections while skipping over the extensive safety warnings and experience requirements outlined throughout the book. He had created elaborate charts and schedules based on the manual's breeding protocols, but had never worked with experienced breeders or handled live venomous snakes before purchasing his collection. The basement operation looked impressive to anyone who didn't know better, with labeled containers and detailed record-keeping systems copied directly from the manual's organizational suggestions. However, Carl's handling technique involved using modified aquarium equipment and homemade restraint devices that he had constructed based on equipment diagrams in his manual, without any understanding of their proper application or critical safety features. Carl had invested thousands of dollars in his setup, purchasing expensive temperature control equipment and professional-grade lighting systems. The impressive appearance of his facility had convinced him that he was operating at the same level as experienced breeders, despite having zero hands-on training or mentorship from anyone who actually knew what they were doing. Carl's basement was completely isolated from the main house, with thick walls that would muffle any sounds of distress. His family was unaware of the true extent of his collection, believing he kept only a few harmless snakes for educational purposes. The basement's separate entrance meant Carl could work for hours without anyone knowing his activities, schedule, or condition. Eastern coral snakes are highly venomous elapids, averaging 2 to 3 feet in length, with distinctive red, yellow, and black banding. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing progressive paralysis, respiratory failure, and death if untreated. Unlike hemotoxic venoms that cause obvious local tissue damage, coral snake venom produces minimal initial symptoms at the bite site, while systematically shutting down the victim's nervous system. Bites may seem minor initially, but the neurotoxic effects can progress rapidly to complete respiratory paralysis and death within hours. Carl's critical error came when he made a decision that perfectly demonstrated how dangerous a little knowledge can be. He decided to separate two eastern coral snakes that had been housed together based on his manual's breeding recommendations. But Carl had completely misunderstood the species' behavioral patterns and handling requirements. The two coral snakes had been coexisting peacefully, but Carl was convinced they needed individual housing based on a breeding protocol he had misinterpreted from his manual. In reality, the snakes were not showing any signs of stress or aggression, but Carl's interference would create a dangerous situation that his inexperience couldn't handle. Carl decided to use his homemade restraint tube, which he had constructed from PVC pipe based on a diagram in his manual. Carl had misunderstood the critical measurements and safety features, creating a device that was not only useless, but actually more dangerous than no restraint at all. The tube opening was too large to provide proper control, and the length was insufficient for safe handling of the species. As Carl attempted to guide the first coral snake into his inadequate restraint device, the snake immediately began struggling against the tube. The animal's defensive behavior escalated as Carl tried desperately to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his capabilities. Carl made the fatal decision to reposition the tube to gain better control, apparently believing he could manage an increasingly stressed, venomous snake through trial and error. The coral snake managed to twist around the pathetic restraint and strike at Carl's right hand, sinking its small but deadly fangs into the webbing between his thumb and index finger and delivering a full load of neurotoxic venom before Carl could react. Carl immediately dropped the useless tube and stepped back, examining what appeared to be two tiny puncture wounds with minimal bleeding. Unlike the dramatic tissue damage he had read about with other venomous species, the coral snake bite looked almost insignificant, a deception that would prove fatal. Following his manual's emergency protocol section to the letter, he immediately noted the time of the bite and began documenting his symptoms in a notebook, apparently believing this academic exercise was more important than getting immediate medical treatment. The manual's description of coral snake envenomation mentioned that symptoms could be delayed, but Carl interpreted this to mean he had plenty of time to observe and record his condition. Carl spent 30 precious minutes following the manual's suggested first aid procedures, applying a loose bandage and keeping the wound below heart level while carefully recording his observations. He was treating a serious medical emergency like a science experiment, following protocols designed for research settings rather than recognizing that he needed immediate professional medical intervention. During this critical time, the neurotoxic venom began its silent assault on Carl's nervous system. Unlike hemotoxic venoms that cause immediate pain and swelling, the coral snake's neurotoxins produced subtle initial symptoms that Carl dismissed as anxiety. He noted mild tingling around the bite site and slight nausea, symptoms he attributed to stress rather than recognizing them as early signs of systemic envenomation. As the venom spread through his lymphatic system, Carl began experiencing more concerning symptoms. His vision became slightly blurred, and he noticed difficulty focusing on his notebook entries. A slight slurring of his speech developed, which he initially attributed to nervousness. The manual had mentioned these as possible symptoms, but Carl believed he was still in the early observation phase. Carl continued documenting his condition for another 20 minutes, not realizing that the neurotoxic venom was rapidly progressing toward respiratory paralysis. By the time he recognized the severity of his situation, his breathing had become noticeably labored, and he was experiencing significant difficulty swallowing. Carl attempted to climb the basement stairs to call for help, but the neurotoxins had begun affecting his coordination and respiratory muscles. Halfway up the stairs, his legs gave out, and he collapsed, his breathing becoming increasingly shallow as the venom systematically shut down his nervous system. Carl lost consciousness on the basement stairs as respiratory paralysis set in. His family, unaware of his activities, did not discover him until several hours later, when they noticed he had missed dinner. By the time they found him and called emergency services, Carl had suffered prolonged respiratory arrest. Emergency responders attempted resuscitation, but Carl had been without adequate oxygen for too long. Despite aggressive efforts including intubation and cardiac support, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from respiratory failure caused by coral snake envenomation, with the critical delay in discovery preventing any possibility of successful treatment. The investigation revealed that Carl had collapsed approximately 35 minutes after the bite, well before his family discovered him. Medical experts testified that immediate medical intervention might have saved his life, but the isolated location of his basement operation and his family's lack of awareness about his activities had created a fatal delay in discovery and treatment. The basement investigation revealed an extensive collection with detailed records and charts copied from Carl's breeding manual. The manual was found open to the emergency treatment section, with handwritten notes showing Carl's methodical attempts to follow protocols that were completely inappropriate for his situation. Several animals had died from stress-related illnesses caused by improper housing combinations that Carl had misunderstood from the manual's breeding instructions. Carl's death was ruled accidental, caused by envenomation from illegally possessed venomous reptiles with delayed discovery preventing medical intervention. Animal control officers required assistance from reptile specialists to safely remove and relocate the surviving 42 animals to appropriate facilities. It was December 10, 2012, deep in the lowland forests of Bolivia, a place where the air felt heavy and alive, pressing down like a damp blanket. The canopy above was a living ceiling, a patchwork of emerald leaves swaying in the humid breeze. Down on the forest floor, sunlight struggled to break through, filtering into thin shafts that lit up clouds of drifting insects. Beneath the tangled green was another world entirely, one ruled by predators, some killed with teeth and claws, others with stealth and muscle, and some with coils so powerful they could silence even the strongest prey. For the 26-year-old Javier Ortega, this wilderness was not a place to fear. It was home. Born and raised in a small village near the Rio Mamoré, he had grown up navigating the slow, muddy waters in dugout canoes, fishing for piranha and catfish, and hunting small game in the surrounding forest. He knew the dangers here, jaguars lurking in the shadows, caimans watching from the riverbanks, venomous snakes coiled under fallen logs. But the boa constrictor? That was different. Boas were common here, and people spoke of them with respect, not dread. They were powerful, yes, but unlike anacondas or highly venomous species, they rarely attacked humans. They hunted rodents, birds, and monkeys, not grown men, or so Javier believed. One humid afternoon in late November, Javier set out to check his family's banana plot with only a worn machete and a sack. The rain-slick trail closed in with low vines and stifling heat. Near a bend in the path, he paused to rest, leaning on the worn wooden handle of his machete. That's when it struck. From the leaf litter at his feet, a thick, muscular shape erupted with startling speed. Before Javier could move, the head of a massive boa constrictor, over 15 feet long and as thick as his thigh, latched onto his calf. Its recurved teeth anchored deep into his flesh, holding him like a hooked fish. Pain shot up his leg. He shouted in shock, stumbling backward, but the snake was already in motion. In less than a second, its body surged upward, looping tightly around his legs, then his hips, then his torso. The pressure was immediate and suffocating. Javier swung his machete wildly, hacking at the coils. But the angle was wrong, and the blade was dull. The snake's grip tightened with every exhale, a slow, deliberate rhythm designed to crush and suffocate. Constriction doesn't break bones. It stops blood flow, it prevents the lungs from expanding, and it forces the heart to strain against impossible pressure. Within moments, the forest was filled with the sound of his choking breaths, each one shallower than the last. Somewhere farther down the path, two boys gathering firewood heard the noise. They followed the sound until they stumbled into the clearing and froze. Javier was on the ground, half hidden beneath a living knot of scales. His face was flushed dark red, eyes wide in panic. One of the boys bolted back toward the village, shouting for help. The other stayed, yelling and throwing sticks at the snake in a desperate attempt to distract it. The boa didn't flinch. Its coils shifted slightly, readjusting, squeezing harder. Minutes later, several men burst through the trees, machetes and wooden clubs in hand. They attacked from all sides, hacking at the thick body. The snake writhed violently, tail whipping across the ground, but still it held on. Finally, with one powerful swing, a man severed its head. The coils loosened, and the snake's body fell away, twitching with reflexive contractions. But it was already too late. Javier's body lay limp in the mud. His chest was still, everything pounding his back, shaking his shoulders, pressing their mouths to his in a frantic attempt to breathe life back into him. But nothing worked. They stood in silence, the enormity of what had happened sinking in. Someone muttered a prayer. Others glanced down at the dead snake, its skin glistening in the dim light, the sheer size of it a grim reminder of its power. By nightfall, the story had spread through the village. People spoke in hushed voices, warning children not to wander alone, especially during the wet season when snakes hunted more actively. For many, it was the first time they had heard of a boa killing a man. In the days that followed, a few outsiders came to ask questions. Wildlife experts explained that while such attacks were rare, they were not impossible. Large boas are ambush predators, striking when prey comes too close. Once their coils lock in, escape is almost impossible without immediate and violent intervention. It was October 7th, 2016, and the pre-dawn darkness enveloped a local zoo outside San Antonio as maintenance crews began their daily routines before the facility opened to the public. The crisp autumn air carried the sounds of awakening animals as staff members moved quietly through the pathways, checking enclosures and preparing for another busy day of education and conservation. Miguel Santos arrived at his usual time, his weathered hands carrying the tools and supplies needed for his morning inspection of the big cat exhibits. At 34, Miguel had built a reputation as one of the zoo's most reliable maintenance workers, his 8 years of experience making him a trusted member of the animal care team. The father of 2 young children took immense pride in maintaining the habitats that housed some of the world's most magnificent predators. His meticulous attention to detail and genuine care for animal welfare had earned him the respect of keepers and veterinarians throughout the facility. Miguel's morning routine included checking the jaguar exhibit for any overnight damage or debris that might pose safety risks to both animals and visitors. The South American big cats were housed in a state-of-the-art facility featuring dense vegetation, climbing structures, and multiple holding areas connected by service corridors that allowed staff to work safely while maintaining the cats' natural behaviors. Jaguars are the 3rd largest big cats in the world, with powerful builds that make them exceptional hunters both on land and in water. These solitary predators possess the strongest bite force of any big cat, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. Adult jaguars can weigh up to 250 pounds and move with silent stealth through dense vegetation, making them nearly invisible until they choose to strike. Their territorial nature and powerful hunting instincts remain fully intact in captivity. Miguel noticed that the gate leading to the service corridor behind the jaguar jaguar exhibit wasn't properly secured, the latch mechanism appearing to have been left open from the previous evening's feeding routine. His experience told him that such oversights needed immediate attention to maintain the strict safety protocols that protected both staff and animals. Miguel believed the jaguar was secured in its indoor holding area, based on the status indicator showing the animal had been shifted the previous night. He entered the service corridor to investigate the gate mechanism and clear a fallen tree branch that had blown into the area during the night. The narrow walkway provided access to multiple viewing points and maintenance areas, while keeping staff safely separated from the big cats by reinforced barriers and electronic monitoring systems. Miguel's radio remained clipped to his belt as he focused on the mechanical issue that needed his attention. The adult male jaguar had actually been resting in the tall grass near the service area, his spotted coat providing perfect camouflage among the shadows and vegetation. The big cat remained motionless as Miguel entered the corridor, his predatory instincts assessing this unexpected intrusion into his territory. Jaguars are ambush predators that rely on stealth and explosive power to overwhelm their prey, often attacking from behind with devastating efficiency. Miguel bent down to retrieve the fallen branch, his back turned to the area where the jaguar lay hidden. The big cat moved with silent precision, covering the distance between them in a single powerful leap that gave Miguel no opportunity to react or call for help. The jaguar's 200-pound frame struck Miguel with crushing force, driving him to the ground while powerful jaws clamped down on his neck and shoulders. The attack was swift and methodical, driven by territorial instincts and the jaguar's natural hunting behaviors. Miguel never had the opportunity to reach his radio, the ambush occurring too quickly for him to call for help. The jaguar's powerful bite force and razor-sharp claws inflicted fatal injuries within minutes of the initial attack. Miguel's supervisor discovered his body 20 minutes later during a routine check of the maintenance schedule, finding the service gate still open and signs of the violent encounter scattered throughout the corridor. The jaguar had returned to his normal resting area, showing no signs of continued aggression toward zoo staff who arrived to secure the scene. Emergency protocols were immediately implemented to ensure the safety of other workers, while investigators documented the tragic accident. The incident prompted a comprehensive review of safety procedures and gate mechanisms throughout the facility, with new redundant systems installed to prevent similar oversights. Miguel's death highlighted the critical importance of communication protocols and backup safety measures when working around dangerous predators, leading to enhanced training programs for all zoo maintenance personnel. It was June 22, 2014, and the rural farmlands of East Texas stretched endlessly under the evening sky as Jake Morrison drove his pickup truck along dusty back roads toward his final service call of the day. The 29-year-old wildlife removal specialist had been working since dawn, responding to calls from farmers and homeowners dealing with unwanted animal visitors on their properties. Jake operated a small wildlife control business that served the rural communities scattered across East Texas, an area where encounters between humans and dangerous wildlife were common. He had 5 years of experience removing common species like raccoons, opossums, and non-venomous snakes, but his training with venomous species was limited. Financial pressures from his recent marriage had forced Jake to accept jobs he wasn't fully qualified for, including calls involving potentially dangerous snakes. The call had come from a local farmer who reported finding a colorful snake in his chicken coop. Jake was rushing to complete multiple service calls in one day to maximize his income, a practice that often led to careless mistakes. He carried basic equipment in his truck, but lacked the specialized tools and training necessary for safely handling venomous species. The nearest hospital was 45 minutes away through rural back roads, and Jake had no access to anti-venom or emergency medical support. Texas coral snakes are among North America's most venomous species, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are small, secretive snakes that are often confused with harmless species like the scarlet king snake, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Coral snakes have a distinctive banding pattern of red, yellow, and black rings, but the traditional rhyme used to identify them can be unreliable under poor lighting conditions or stress. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins venom's that cause muscle paralysis and respiratory failure, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Jake arrived at the farm just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the property that made visibility poor. The farmer led him to the chicken coop where he had spotted the snake, describing it as having bright red, yellow, and black bands. In the dim lighting of the coop, Jake examined the snake and attempted to identify it using the Red Touch's black, friend of Jack Rhyme, which proved unreliable under the poor lighting conditions. The poor lighting and Jake's fatigue from a long day of work led him to misidentify the Texas coral snake as a harmless scarlet king snake. This fatal mistake caused Jake to handle the snake without gloves or proper restraint equipment, believing he was dealing with a non-venomous species that posed no threat to his safety. Jake reached down and grasped the snake behind its head, intending to remove it from the chicken coop and relocate it to a more appropriate habitat. The snake initially remained calm, but as Jake continued handling it and applied pressure while trying to secure his grip, the coral snake became defensive and bit him on the thumb. It started to clamp down and chewed for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Jake immediately realized his mistake as he looked more closely at the snake's banding pattern in better light. The distinctive red bands touching yellow bands clearly identified the snake as a venomous coral snake, not the harmless king snake he had thought he was handling. Jake released the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his thumb, knowing that he had just received a potentially dangerous envenomation. Jake rushed to his truck and began the 45-minute drive to the nearest hospital, but panic and distraction from the snake bite caused him to drive erratically. His anxiety about the envenomation and fatigue from his long workday impaired his concentration and judgment behind the wheel. Jake's vision became affected by stress and fear as he worried about the venom's effects, making it increasingly difficult to focus on driving safely. 20 minutes into his desperate race to reach medical help, Jake's panic and exhaustion caused him to lose control of his pickup truck on a sharp curve. He crashed into a roadside ditch, the impact rendering him unconscious. Jake remained trapped in his vehicle for several hours before being discovered, during which time the coral snake venom continued its progression through his system. The farmer found Jake's crashed truck 3 hours later when he went to check on the wildlife removal specialist who had failed to return for payment. By the time emergency responders extracted Jake from the wreckage and transported him to the hospital, the neurotoxic venom had caused severe respiratory depression. Jake died from respiratory failure several hours after the bite, as the rural hospital lacked the ventilatory support equipment necessary to maintain his breathing until anti-venom could be obtained. The investigation revealed that Jake had misidentified a deadly coral snake as a harmless species, leading to his fatal envenomation. The delayed discovery of his crash and the lack of immediate respiratory support contributed to the tragic outcome. His death highlighted the dangers faced by wildlife control operators who lack proper training and equipment for handling venomous species. Jake's widow was devastated by the loss of her new husband, and the incident led to enhanced training requirements for wildlife removal specialists throughout Texas. It was March 17, 2016, and the late afternoon sun cast dancing reflections across the pristine channels of the Okavango Delta as 29-year-old James Okafor unloaded his fishing gear from their rented Mokoro canoe. The massive inland delta, formed where the Okavango River spreads across the Kalahari Desert, created one of the world's most unique ecosystems, with seasonal floods transforming 15,000 square kilometers of desert into a water wonderland teeming with wildlife. James had driven up from Gaborone with his girlfriend Sarah for a weekend fishing adventure, eager to show off his supposed angling skills. James worked as an auto mechanic in Botswana's capital city, where his reputation for fixing broken engines was the source of considerable local pride. He had grown up fishing in the crocodile-infested waters of the Limpopo River system, and believed that years of dodging danger made him somehow invincible. He casually dismissed guide warnings, convinced that his past luck made him practically untouchable. In fact, he had joked with Sarah that hippos were just big cows that could be outsmarted with a few swift kicks. The couple had joined a small camping expedition organized by a local tour operator, with their campsite located on a small island surrounded by reed beds and shallow channels. Their guide had provided the standard safety briefing about hippos and crocodiles, emphasizing the importance of staying close to designated areas and avoiding water entry during dawn and dusk hours, when dangerous animals were most active. James had nodded and smiled, but as soon as the guide turned away, he was already scheming to explore a shortcut fishing spot he had noticed from the canoe. What James failed to appreciate was that the Okavango Delta supported one of Africa's largest hippopotamus populations, with several thousand individuals using the waterways as permanent habitat. The seasonal flooding patterns created complex territories that shifted throughout the year, making it impossible for visitors to predict where dangerous encounters might occur. Hippopotamus are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls can weigh up to 4,000 pounds and reach lengths of 13 feet, with massive jaws capable of opening 150 degrees to reveal canine teeth that can grow up to 20 inches long. Despite their bulky appearance, hippos can run 30 miles per hour on land and move with astonishing speed through shallow water. They are highly territorial, particularly during mating season, and will aggressively defend their established routes between feeding areas and water refuges. The attack began when James, ignoring Sarah's repeated reminders, waded into what appeared to be a shallow lagoon near their campsite to cast his line toward a promising reed bed where he had spotted fish jumping. Sarah was setting up their tent approximately 50 meters away, occasionally glancing towards the water with growing unease as James pranced around in the mud wearing flip-flops. The area James had chosen was actually a well-established hippo path, connecting deeper channels with shoreline grazing areas. James had waited approximately 15 meters from shore when a massive bull hippo surfaced just 20 meters away, his enormous head breaking the surface with a loud splash. The animal had been resting in the deeper channel and was beginning his evening movement toward feeding areas when he encountered the human intruder in his established territory. James froze, waving his fishing rod like a wand. The bull hippo's response was immediate and aggressive, his territorial instincts triggered by James's presence in the shallow water that served as his primary access route. The massive animal moved toward James with deceptive speed, his powerful legs propelling his more than 3,000-pound body through the water. James attempted to run backward, slipping over a submerged root and flailing his rod. Every step only sank him deeper into the mucky bottom. The hippo reached James when he was still 10 meters from safety, jaws opening to reveal the full extent of his formidable dental weaponry. The hippo's massive jaws clamped down on James's torso, the enormous canine teeth puncturing through his ribcage and into vital organs with crushing force. The sheer weight of the bite lifted James partially out of the water as the hippo shook his head violently from side to side. James's screams were cut short as the hippo released his initial grip only to bite down again, this time targeting James's shoulder and upper chest. The second bite caused additional massive trauma. Breaking bones and tearing through muscle tissue, blood spread rapidly across the water's surface. The hippo continued its assault, using its enormous head to push James under the water repeatedly. The attack continued for less than a minute as the hippo ensured the threat was neutralized. James's struggles weakened rapidly as blood loss and repeated submersion took their toll. The hippo finally dragged James's body towards slightly deeper water near the reed bed before releasing him and retreating into the maze of channels. Sarah screamed and waved frantically for help, but the hippo had disappeared into the reeds. The tour guide radioed emergency services immediately, but the delta's complex channels and the danger of additional hippo encounters made immediate recovery impossible. Professional hunters and park rangers arrived within 2 hours and began a careful search. James's body was located the following morning, partially submerged in shallow water near the reed bed, approximately 30 meters from the initial attack site. The medical examination revealed that James had died from a combination of massive trauma to his torso and vital organs, severe blood loss, and drowning during the repeated submersions. The investigation concluded that James had entered a known hippo territory during the animal's active period, with his presence in the shallow water triggering a lethal territorial response. James's death devastated his family and drew attention to the dangers of human overconfidence in wildlife tourism. His girlfriend Sarah struggled with survivor's guilt, but became an advocate for enhanced safety protocols. It was March 15, 2016, in a rural area outside Phoenix, Arizona. The converted garage sat behind a modest ranch house, its windows painted black from the inside. Makeshift plywood shelving held dozens of cracked aquariums held together with duct tape. Craig Winters was 34, a part-time pizza delivery driver who had become obsessed with venomous snakes after reading a single outdated herpetology textbook from 1987 that he found at a garage sale. The textbook clearly emphasized professional snake hooks and restraint tubes, equipment Craig neither owned nor believed he needed. Despite the book's detailed safety protocols, Craig had completely ignored these sections, focusing only on the parts describing different species and their venom potency. Craig believed that reading one 30-year-old book made him qualified to handle the deadliest snakes in North America. He had never consulted current literature, spoken to veterinarians, or contacted experienced keepers. His handling technique consisted of using modified kitchen utensils and homemade tools he had crafted based on crude diagrams from his ancient textbook. The garage was a disaster waiting to happen. No safety equipment, no anti-venom, no emergency protocols, and no one even knew what he was doing. Craig frequently referenced his worn textbook during handling sessions, actually stopping mid-procedure to flip through pages while holding dangerous snakes. The book's safety recommendations were 3 decades out of date, and Craig was following techniques that had been proven deadly years before he was even born. Western diamondback rattlesnakes are among the largest venomous snakes in the southwestern United States. Adults average 3 to 5 feet in length, weighing 3 to 4 pounds. They can strike at speeds reaching 2/3 their body length in under 0.2 seconds. These snakes are highly defensive when cornered or stressed. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, designed to break down blood cells and tissue, with a typical adult bite delivering 250 to 350 milligrams of venom. The venom contains a complex mixture of enzymes that destroy red blood cells, damage blood vessel walls, and prevent normal clotting. Effects that can prove fatal without proper medical intervention. The incident occurred when Craig made perhaps the most foolish decision of his short career as a snake keeper. He decided to move his largest and most dangerous snake, a 4-foot Western diamondback that he had illegally acquired from an out-of-state dealer, to what he thought was a better enclosure. The snake had been crammed into a cracked 20-gallon aquarium, barely able to move, and had become a coiled ball of pure aggression. Craig consulted his ancient textbook, which recommended proper snake hooks and restraint tubes for safe handling. Instead of recognizing that he was completely unequipped for this task, Craig decided to make his own handling tool. He bent a coat hanger into a loop, apparently believing that 30 cents worth of wire would protect him from one of North America's deadliest snakes. As Craig opened the cracked aquarium lid, the rattlesnake immediately went into full defensive mode, coiling tightly and rattling continuously. Craig attempted to slip his bent coat hanger around the rattlesnake's neck, apparently believing he could lasso a lightning-fast predator like he was roping cattle. The stressed animal struck upward through the pathetic restraint with explosive speed. The strike lasted less than half a second, but the snake's fangs sank deep into Craig's right forearm just below the elbow, delivering a substantial venom load directly into his tissue before immediately withdrawing. Blood immediately poured from 2 distinct fang marks, each several millimeters apart. Craig dropped his useless coat hanger tool and stumbled backward, knocking over several containers and sending other snakes into defensive frenzies. Rather than immediately calling for help, Craig made his second catastrophically stupid decision of the day. He sat down and actually tried to time his symptoms while consulting the book's treatment section. The text recommended applying ice and elevating the wound, practices no longer recommended by modern medicine and unlikely to help his situation. The swelling had already begun creeping past his elbow when Craig finally looked up from the book's yellowed pages. His fingers had started tingling, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. Symptoms the textbook had mentioned, but described in clinical, detached language that bore no resemblance to the reality now consuming his arm. He tried flexing his hand and found his grip weakening noticeably. The bite site had turned a dark purple red, with streaks of discoloration radiating outward like twisted branches. Still, Craig convinced himself that the ice and elevation were working, that he just needed a few more minutes for the swelling to stop. The clock on the garage wall ticked past the 20-minute mark since the bite. Craig spent 35 precious minutes following these outdated instructions while the venom spread through his lymphatic system. During this time, swelling began at the bite site and started progressing up his arm at an alarming rate. More critically, early venom effects had begun impairing his blood's clotting mechanisms, setting the stage for what would become a fatal combination of injuries. The pain quickly intensified beyond anything Craig had imagined from his textbook's sanitized descriptions. His arm began to feel heavy and numb, while the swelling continued expanding. Craig noticed his heart rate increasing dramatically and began experiencing waves of nausea and dizziness as the venom's hemotoxins began destroying his red blood cells. When Craig began experiencing severe symptoms and his blood pressure started dropping, he finally realized that his textbook might not have prepared him for reality. The venom had caused significant coagulopathy, making his blood unable to clot properly, a condition that would prove catastrophic. Craig stumbled to his car and attempted to drive to a hospital, but his condition rapidly deteriorated as the venom's effects intensified. His vision blurred from the envenomation effects, and he lost control of the vehicle as his coordination failed. His car rolled through an intersection and struck a utility pole with devastating force. The crash caused severe internal trauma, including ruptured organs and massive hemorrhaging. With his blood's clotting mechanisms actively deteriorating from the venom, Craig's body could not control the internal bleeding from these major injuries. The combination of progressive coagulopathy and severe trauma created a medical emergency that would prove unsurvivable. When paramedics arrived, they found Craig unconscious with severe swelling at the bite site and signs of massive internal bleeding that his compromised blood could not control. His blood pressure was critically low, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. He was immediately intubated and transported to a trauma center with lights and sirens. At the hospital, doctors faced a complex challenge. Hospital laboratory tests confirmed severe venom-induced coagulopathy that made it impossible to control the substantial internal bleeding from the vehicle collision. Despite aggressive treatment, including blood transfusions and emergency antivenom administration, the combination of major trauma and progressive clotting failure had created fatal complications. Craig died approximately 4 hours after the bite from complications of massive internal hemorrhaging. The severe crash injuries, which included ruptured internal organs, became unsurvivable due to the venom's effects on his blood's ability to clot. Medical examiners determined that while the 25-minute delay in seeking treatment had allowed venom-induced coagulopathy to develop, it was the combination of this blood disorder with severe collision trauma that proved fatal. The hemotoxins had disrupted his blood's clotting mechanisms, making the internal bleeding from the crash impossible to control. Investigators discovered the garage collection during a property search and were appalled by the conditions. The 12 venomous snakes, all illegally possessed without permits, were found in deplorable housing, with several dead from dehydration and temperature extremes. The case was ruled an accidental death caused by unvenomation-induced coagulopathy, complicated by vehicular trauma. Animal control officers safely removed the surviving snakes and transferred them to licensed facilities. The investigation revealed that Craig had no permits, no training, and no business handling animals that required years of experience to manage safely. It was July 14, 2014, on the marshy northern shore of Louisiana's Lake Pontchartrain, a vast brackish lake where Gulf tides met inland rivers. Its shoreline was wild and untamed, with tall reeds, half-sunken cypress roots, and air heavy with salt and decay. Locals knew the place well. For some, it was a paradise good fishing, peaceful sunsets, and nights where the horizon glowed orange from distant city lights. For others, it carried a quiet unease, a healthy respect for the creatures that called the marsh home. And among those creatures, one stood above the rest as the most feared, the cottonmouth, or water moccasin. Thick-bodied, venomous, and notoriously short-tempered, cottonmouths were infamous in the South for holding their ground. While most snakes slither away at the first sign of trouble, the cottonmouth often stood its ground, hooding its mouth wide to flash the ghostly white interior that gave it its name. In Louisiana, they were a fact of life. In the marshes around Pontchartrain, they were everywhere. That afternoon, 42-year-old Roy Lambert parked by an overgrown levee and headed for the shore with his tackle box and cooler. He'd fished these waters since boyhood, knew the snakes well, and had never had trouble as long as you watched your step. Roy headed to a shaded channel, set down his cooler, and cast his line. The bobber plopped into the still water, ripples fading into the heavy summer quiet. On his third cast, he caught movement in the reeds just off to his left. At first, it was only a faint ripple disturbing the surface, small enough to pass for a turtle or a muskrat. But then the ripples straightened into a purposeful line, cutting toward him. A shape emerged, a broad, triangular head lifting just above the waterline. Two dark, unblinking eyes locked on him. The snake's thick, muscular body slid forward with an unhurried confidence, the wake fanning out behind it. Then the mouth opened, flashing that unmistakable cotton-white interior, a warning. Roy froze, his pulse quickening. The cottonmouth didn't break its approach. He took a careful step back toward the bank, but his heels sank into the mud, holding him for just a fraction too long. The snake closed the distance with surprising speed, head rising higher, tongue flicking in rapid bursts. Roy swung his fishing rod down toward it, hoping to scare it off. It didn't work. In an instant, the cottonmouth struck, a blur of motion that buried its fangs deep into the meat of his calf. The pain was instant and violent, a white-hot burn that shot upward through his leg. He stumbled back, splashing into the shallows, but before he could regain his footing, the snake struck again, this time sinking its fangs just above the knee. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone, sliding back into the reeds, vanishing into the marsh's tangled green. The venom worked quickly. Within moments, his calf was swelling, the skin flushed and tight. A deep ache radiated from the wounds, accompanied by a strange, metallic taste in his mouth. His leg throbbed in time with his heartbeat, each pulse spreading the pain further. Gritting his teeth, Roy tried to push himself upright and limp toward the levee. But each step was slower than the last. His breathing quickened, his chest tight. The path back seemed longer than it had minutes ago, the mud pulling at his boots like it wanted to keep him there. Halfway to the road, his vision blurred. The heat pressed in on him from all sides. He tried to call out for help, but the words came out thin and slurred. His legs buckled, dropping him face first into the warm, sticky mud. Down the shore, two teenagers were fishing off a small dock. One glanced up and saw Roy lying in the marsh, barely moving. They shouted to him, but he didn't respond. Dropping their rods, they sprinted toward him, splashing through the shallows. By the time they reached him, Roy's lips were blue and his breathing shallow. Paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, but his pulse was faint, and he was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. The cottonmouth was never found. Word of Roy's death spread quietly among the locals. In bait shops and on back porches, people shook their heads and spoke in low voices. He was experienced, careful. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. And in the snake-filled shallows of the lake, you weren't always the hunter. Sometimes you were the prey. It was September 11th, 2013, and the darkened pathways of a mid-sized wildlife park outside Chicago lay silent beneath the soft glow of scattered security lights. The cool autumn air carried faint rustling from sleeping animals as night shift security guard Robert Hayes began his 2 a.m. patrol. At 51, Robert had spent 12 years protecting the park's collection of rare species, taking pride in ensuring the grounds remained secure during the quiet hours when only a handful of staff remained on site. His calm temperament and thorough approach made him one of the most trusted members of the night crew. Robert's responsibilities included checking exterior fencing, verifying that service doors were properly locked, and ensuring no storm damage or attempted break-ins had occurred. His ring of keys granted access to maintenance corridors and buffer zones, not the primary animal enclosures, but enough that he could inspect infrastructure without needing a keeper present. The wildlife park, which operated without formal accreditation, relied on a mix of older mechanical systems and newer electronic components that required routine attention, especially after heavy rain and high winds. The Great Ape House was one of the park's older structures. Inside were gorillas and orangutans, housed in interconnected indoor habitats, each with holding pens separated by steel mesh, sliding gates, and manually latched doors. Unlike large accredited zoos with multi-layer interlocks, this facility depended heavily on proper manual latching and periodic mechanical inspections. Recent storms had caused intermittent power surges in the building, and maintenance teams had been scheduled to review the containment system later that morning. Western lowland gorillas are powerful primates, with adult silverbacks often weighing more than 350 pounds and capable of delivering tremendous force through their arms and upper body. They are generally calm animals, but sudden movements, bright lights, or unexpected intrusions into their space can trigger intense defensive reactions. In captivity, these natural instincts remain unchanged, making secure barriers and predictable routines essential for staff safety. When Robert approached the exterior of the Great Ape House, his flashlight beam caught what appeared to be storm-related damage on a section of protective fencing that lined the outside of the building. Several metal bars showed fresh bends, likely caused by falling branches. Wanting to assess whether repairs were urgent, Robert unlocked the maintenance buffer gate, leading into the narrow service corridor that separated the public viewing area from the primary barriers. Unbeknownst to him, a mechanical slide gate inside the ape holding area had not fully seated after an earlier cleaning cycle. A piece of debris lodged in the track prevented the gate from locking into place, though a faulty sensor still displayed it as secured. With the gate slightly misaligned, a 350-pound male gorilla had slowly worked it open during the evening hours, entering the keeper access zone, a space that should have remained empty overnight. Robert stepped into the dimly lit service corridor, directing his flashlight toward the damaged exterior fence. His attention was focused upward as he traced the bent metal, unaware that soft shuffling sounds behind him were not part of the building settling. The silverback, already agitated by the storm, by unusual smells, and now by the sudden intrusion of light into a normally quiet area, moved toward the glow. When Robert turned at the faint scuffing behind him, the gorilla was already closing the distance. The 350-pound animal charged with explosive strength, crossing the short span of concrete before Robert had time to raise his radio. Massive fists struck his upper body with devastating force, slamming him backward into the wall. The impact knocked the radio from his belt, leaving him unable to call for help. The silverback's attack was driven by defensive instinct, its powerful arms wrapping around Robert's torso as it attempted to neutralize neutralize the perceived threat. The gorilla's grip compressed Robert's ribcage, pinning his arms while repeated blows rendered him unconscious within seconds. Any movement Robert made intensified the gorilla's response, as instinct signaled the need to eliminate a danger within its space. The assault lasted only moments, but the confined corridor magnified its severity. Once Robert stopped moving, the silverback released him and retreated to a corner near the misaligned gate, chest heaving as adrenaline subsided. The building fell silent again except for the low hum of emergency lights flickering overhead. Robert's absence went unnoticed until his 3 a.m. check-in was missed, prompting another guard to retrace his patrol and find his broken flashlight and motionless body in the service corridor. Emergency protocols activated immediately, and staff tranquilized the silverback before securing the area. Investigators later confirmed debris in the gate track and a faulty latch sensor that had incorrectly signaled the barrier as locked. The Great Ape House was shut down for repairs, with new redundant locks and revised overnight access rules implemented. It was August 11, 2016, and the vast expanse of California's Mojave Desert stretched endlessly under the scorching sun as Sarah Williams set up her campsite in a remote canyon far from civilization. The 31-year-old emergency room nurse had driven hours from Los Angeles to find the solitude she desperately needed, seeking refuge from the emotional turmoil of her difficult divorce proceedings. Sarah had been using solo camping trips as therapy to cope with the stress of her crumbling marriage and demanding career. She deliberately chose remote locations to avoid other people, finding peace in the harsh beauty of the desert landscape. This particular canyon offered the perfect combination of isolation and natural beauty, with towering rock formations providing shelter from the desert winds. Sarah was an experienced hiker and camper, but her knowledge of desert wildlife was limited. She had never encountered venomous snakes during her previous camping adventures, which had mostly taken place in less dangerous environments. The prescription anxiety medication she was taking to cope with her divorce had impaired her judgment and slowed her reaction time, making her more vulnerable to the dangers that lurked in the desert. The rocky outcrop where Sarah chose to make camp provided ideal habitat for one of North America's most dangerous serpents. She was unaware that the crevices and ledges around her campsite were perfect hiding places for snakes seeking shelter from the desert heat. Mojave rattlesnakes are among the most venomous snakes in North America, possessing a potent combination of neurotoxic and hemotoxic venom that makes their bites extremely dangerous. They are perfectly adapted to desert life, remaining hidden during the day and becoming active at dusk when temperatures cool. Mojave rattlesnakes are defensive when surprised or stepped on and will strike when threatened. Their venom contains both tissue-destroying hemotoxins and nerve-attacking neurotoxins, making envenomation potentially fatal without rapid antivenom and respiratory support. As the sun began to set, Sarah walked around her campsite in bare feet, enjoying the feeling of warm sand between her toes. The anxiety medication had made her feel relaxed and carefree, causing her to ignore basic desert safety precautions. She was focused on setting up her tent and preparing dinner, unaware that a large Mojave rattlesnake was coiled in the tall grass just steps away from her campsite. Sarah stepped directly on the hidden rattlesnake as she walked through a patch of desert grass. The snake struck immediately, its fangs penetrating deep into her ankle and injecting venom. Sarah screamed and jumped back, but the damage was already done. The Mojave rattlesnake had delivered a clinically significant unvenomation into Sarah's bloodstream. Sarah was 20 miles from the nearest road, with no cell phone coverage in the remote canyon. She attempted to hike back to her vehicle, but over the following hours, the Mojave rattlesnake venom began its deadly work. The hemotoxic elements began destroying tissue at the bite site, while the neurotoxic components gradually affected her neuromuscular function. Sarah's ankle swelled rapidly as the venom destroyed blood vessels and tissue at the bite site. Over several hours, she began experiencing progressive neuromuscular paralysis as the neurotoxins interfered with nerve signals to her muscles. Her breathing became increasingly labored as the venom affected her respiratory muscles. Sarah wandered through through the desert darkness, her impaired physical condition and the medication's effects preventing her from finding her way back to the road. The harsh desert environment compounded the effects of the snakebite, as dehydration and exposure to extreme temperature fluctuations added to her body's stress. She collapsed several times but managed to continue walking, driven by survival instinct, even as her condition deteriorated. The cooler desert nights provided some relief from the heat, allowing Sarah to survive longer than she might have during the day. But the combination of partial envenomation, dehydration, and exposure gradually overwhelmed her system. Her neuromuscular paralysis worsened over the days, making it increasingly difficult to move or seek shelter. Search and rescue teams found Sarah's body 4 days later, 2 miles from her original campsite. She had died from a combination of snakebite envenomation, severe dehydration, and exposure to the harsh desert conditions. The investigation revealed that Sarah had been taking prescription medication that impaired her judgment and reaction time, contributing to the tragic accident. Sarah's death highlighted the dangers faced by solo campers in remote desert areas where medical help is hours away. Her family was devastated by the loss, and the incident led to enhanced safety warnings for desert camping areas throughout California. It was October 4th, 2017, and the golden light of late afternoon spread across the open savanna of the Masai Mara in southwestern Kenya as 26-year-old Tyler Brennan followed a walking trail toward a small kopje, the rocky outcroppings that dotted the otherwise flat grasslands. Tyler was an experienced safari guide, having grown up in Nairobi with a family deeply involved in wildlife conservation and ecotourism. From a young age, he had learned the rhythms of the African bush, tracking lions, leopards, and elephants, and guiding tourists safely across some of the continent's most dangerous landscapes. Tyler's reputation as a skilled tracker and wildlife interpreter had earned him respect among both tourists and fellow guides. He prided himself on reading animal behavior as precisely as weather patterns and on anticipating wildlife movement in areas where even seasoned rangers would tread cautiously. His sharp instincts and familiarity with the Mara ecosystem had made him a reliable leader for high-end safari groups, often bringing visitors within breathtaking distance of predators while maintaining a meticulous eye for safety. On this particular afternoon, Tyler had been leading a small private walking safari along the edge of a wooded valley. The purpose was to allow his guests a rare opportunity to observe a pride of lions from a safe distance, following the animals' movements as they returned to their territory. The pride had been spotted earlier that morning in the area, and Tyler had carefully plotted a route that would offer both visibility and safety, relying on the wind, terrain, and distance to keep them out of harm's way. The path took Tyler and the tourists through a secluded area of mixed woodland and grassland. Tyler had been tracking the pride's movements based on fresh spoor and was confident they were still several hundred meters away. What Tyler didn't know was that one of the pride's male lions had made a fresh kill during the midday hours and had dragged a young impala into dense brush just off the trail, creating an unexpected danger zone directly in their path. Lions are apex predators of the savanna, with adult males weighing up to 500 pounds and possessing the strength to subdue a full-grown Cape buffalo, or even a zebra, with precise, coordinated attacks. They are social animals, but male lions are fiercely protective of kills, especially during the dry season when prey is scarce. Their powerful forelimbs, retractable claws, and crushing bite deliver devastating force, while their acute sense of smell allows them to detect intruders at distances far beyond human perception. Lions defending high-value food will attack without hesitation, often killing intruders outright. Tyler's critical misjudgment occurred when he led the group along what appeared to be a clear trail through an area of dense brush. While his training emphasized maintaining awareness of fresh kills and lion activity, the concealed nature of the kill site and the lack of visible carcass made detection nearly impossible. The male lion had been lying in the thick brush beside his kill, completely hidden from view, when the human group approached to within 15 meters of his position. The lion detected the human scent and movement immediately. His body tensed as he assessed the threat to his food, his territorial instincts overriding any natural caution around humans. Tyler was leading the group, his attention focused on scanning the open areas ahead, rather than the dense brush beside the trail. He had no warning before the attack began. The lion exploded from the brush with devastating speed, covering the 15 meters in seconds. Tyler turned at the sound of breaking branches and saw the massive predator charging directly at him. He raised his walking stick and shouted, attempting to make himself appear larger and more threatening. But the lion's momentum was unstoppable. Tyler tried to step backward, but his foot caught on a root, causing him to stumble. The lion struck Tyler with the full force of 450 to 500 pounds, traveling at maximum speed, the impact driving him backward onto the ground. Tyler's walking stick flew from his hands as he crashed onto his back. The wind knocked from his lungs. The lion was on him instantly, his massive forepaws pinning Tyler's shoulders to the ground while his claws tore through clothing and skin. The lion's jaws clamped down on Tyler's throat with crushing force, his canine teeth penetrating deep into the vital structures of Tyler's neck. The bite severed major blood vessels and caused catastrophic damage to Tyler's trachea and cervical spine. Tyler's body convulsed briefly as the lion maintained his grip, ensuring the threat was neutralized. The attack lasted approximately 30 seconds from the initial charge to Tyler's final movements. The tourists, who had been several meters behind Tyler, screamed and backed away rapidly. The lion released Tyler's body and stood over it for several moments, blood dripping from his jaws as he assessed whether any other threats remained. Satisfied that the danger had passed, the lion returned to the dense brush where his kill remained hidden, leaving Tyler's body lying on the trail. The tourists retreated to a safe distance and used their radio to call for emergency assistance. Rangers arrived within 45 minutes, but Tyler was already dead, his injuries far beyond any possibility of survival. The lion remained in the area, guarding his kill, and rangers had to use vehicles and noise to drive him away before they could recover Tyler's body. Investigators concluded that while Tyler had been highly experienced, the concealed nature of the kill site and the lion's position in dense brush had made detection nearly impossible. The lion's behavior was entirely predictable given the circumstances, a male defending a fresh kill from perceived threats. The attack site showed clear evidence of the impala carcass hidden in the brush just meters from where Tyler had been killed. Wildlife officials faced a difficult decision regarding the lion. While the animal had killed a human, it had been exhibiting normal food defensive behavior in response to humans approaching its kill. After extensive discussion, officials decided to monitor the lion closely, but not destroy it, as the attack had occurred due to an accidental close encounter rather than predatory behavior. The lion was tracked for several weeks to ensure it did not display unusual aggression toward humans. The incident sent shockwaves through Kenya's safari community, highlighting how even highly skilled guides could fall victim to a predator's instinctual response when circumstances created unexpected danger. Colleagues and tourists mourned Tyler's death, emphasizing the dangers of walking safaris in areas with active lion populations and fresh kills. His funeral drew attendees from across the continent, a solemn reminder of the fine line between human curiosity and wildlife survival instincts. The story of Tyler Brennan became a cautionary tale for safari operators, reinforcing safety protocols and the importance of constant vigilance, even for experienced guides. It was June 8, 2015, in a suburban apartment complex near Orlando, Florida. The one-bedroom apartment had been transformed into a reptile nightmare, with snake enclosures covering every available floor space. Plastic storage bins with holes drilled in the lids housed 14 snakes, including several venomous species. The overwhelmed ventilation system created condensation and mold growth on the walls, while the constant smell of animal waste made the space nearly uninhabitable. Trent Wilson was 26, an unemployed college dropout who had convinced himself he was a snake expert after binge-watching online videos and following social media accounts of reptile keepers. He had spent months consuming content about snake handling, gravitating toward the most dramatic videos of people working with venomous species. Trent believed that watching enough videos qualified him to handle deadly animals, a delusion that would prove fatal. Trent's collection had grown far beyond his apartment's capacity, but he had managed to hide it from building management through a combination of air fresheners, careful timing, and sheer luck. His handling method consisted of wearing thick leather work gloves that he was convinced would protect him from any bite. Despite numerous online warnings that gloves provided no real protection against venomous snakes. The apartment was a ticking time bomb. It violated lease agreements, local ordinances, and basic common sense. But Trent had successfully concealed his illegal zoo for 8 months. He had no emergency plans, no proper equipment, and relied entirely on online videos for care information, despite most content creators explicitly warning viewers about the extreme dangers of venomous species. The enclosures had become increasingly filthy over the past 2 weeks, with waste accumulating and water bowls going days without proper cleaning. Several of his snakes had become more defensive during feeding attempts, striking at the enclosure walls when he approached, and refusing food altogether. Trent had watched videos where experienced keepers discussed temporary feeding strikes, but those same videos emphasized proper enclosure sizes and professional-grade handling equipment that his setup completely lacked. The animal's defensive behavior and feeding refusals had become more frequent, yet Trent continued following his established routine with the same inadequate tools. Trent had been putting off cleaning several enclosures for over a week because the animals had become increasingly defensive. Instead of recognizing this as a clear warning that his setup was failing, he decided to push forward with maintenance using equipment that was laughably inadequate for the task. Gaboon vipers are massive African snakes, averaging 4 to 5 feet in length and weighing 15 to 20 pounds, making them among the heaviest venomous snakes in the world. They possess the longest fangs of any venomous snake, reaching up to 2 inches in length, capable of penetrating deeply into tissue and delivering massive venom loads. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, causing severe tissue destruction, massive internal hemorrhaging, and cardiovascular collapse. A single bite can inject 350 to 600 milligrams of venom, among the highest yields of any snake, making untreated bites extremely dangerous and potentially fatal. Trent's fatal mistake came when he made a decision that defied all logic and common sense. He decided to clean the enclosure of a 4-foot Gaboon viper that he had illegally purchased from an out-of-state dealer and had been refusing food for 2 weeks. Trent was wearing his thick leather work gloves and planning to use a pair of barbecue tongs, apparently believing this combination would protect him from a snake whose fangs could penetrate materials far tougher than leather. As Trent opened the container lid, the Gaboon viper raised its massive triangular head slightly and took a defensive posture, its body tensing in preparation. The snake had been living in chronic stress for weeks in a plastic storage bin barely large enough for the snake to stretch out, making it extremely reactive to any disturbance. Trent attempted to use the barbecue tongs to move the snake while reaching into the container with his other hand to remove the water bowl. This meant he was trying to control a deadly animal with a tool designed for flipping hamburgers while putting his hand directly into striking range. The Gaboon viper struck with explosive speed that contradicted its reputation for sluggish movement, its mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal the 2-inch fangs. The snake's massive fangs penetrated deeply through Trent's leather glove as if it were made of tissue paper, sinking their full length deep into his left hand between his thumb and index finger. The bite lasted only seconds, long enough to deliver an enormous venom load directly into the tissue. When Trent finally pulled free, venom and blood coated his torn glove. He quickly removed the glove and saw 2 deep puncture wounds bleeding heavily, with the holes visibly larger than any snakebite he had seen in videos. The wounds were alarmingly deep, with tissue already beginning to swell around the fang marks. Instead of immediately calling for emergency help, Trent decided to apply pressure to stop the bleeding and elevated his hand above his heart. He was following generic advice from online videos about treating snake bites, not realizing this guidance was meant for non-venomous bites and was completely inappropriate for his situation. Over the next 20 minutes, Trent watched his hand swell to grotesque proportions while experiencing pain that intensified beyond anything he had imagined. The swelling progressed with alarming speed, causing his entire hand to become discolored and extremely painful. The tissue around the bite site began turning dark purple as the venom destroyed blood vessels and cells. When the swelling reached his forearm and he began feeling nauseous and lightheaded, he finally began to understand that he was in serious trouble. The pain had become absolutely excruciating, far beyond anything described in the casual videos he had watched. The swelling continued expanding despite his elevation efforts, his hand now resembling a grotesque balloon. Trent began experiencing rapid heartbeat, profuse sweating, difficulty breathing, and confusion as the massive venom load began affecting his cardiovascular system. When he finally called for emergency assistance almost an hour after the bite, Trent could barely speak coherently due to the pain and his rapidly deteriorating condition. The venom had begun causing widespread internal hemorrhaging and tissue death throughout his hand and arm. By this time, the toxins had spread through his lymphatic system and were causing his blood pressure to plummet dangerously. Paramedics found Trent conscious but in severe distress, with massive swelling that had progressed past his elbow and obvious signs of systemic envenomation, including dangerously low blood pressure, rapid pulse, and visible bruising beginning to appear on his arm and chest. At the hospital, doctors faced multiple complications. Antivenom was not immediately available on site and had to be located through regional wildlife networks, causing critical delays in treatment. The massive venom load had already begun causing extensive damage throughout Trent's system. Laboratory tests revealed rapidly deteriorating clotting factors and abnormal bleeding parameters. By the time antivenom was located and administered, Trent had developed disseminated intravascular coagulation, a life-threatening condition where the blood clots uncontrollably throughout the body while simultaneously losing its ability to clot properly. Medical staff noticed bleeding from IV insertion sites and other signs of severe coagulopathy. The venom had triggered a cascade of circulatory collapse. Trent's blood pressure continued dropping as his cardiovascular system failed to maintain circulation. The DIC caused widespread clotting in small blood vessels, while paradoxically causing uncontrollable bleeding elsewhere. His kidneys began failing from the combination of hypotension, toxic venom metabolites, and the breakdown products from destroyed tissue overwhelming his organs. Trent died approximately 14 hours after the bite from cardiovascular collapse and multiple organ failure. The massive venom load from the Gaboon viper had triggered a cascade of circulatory complications that his body could not overcome despite aggressive medical intervention. The apartment investigation revealed Trent's hidden collection, with several animals found dead from neglect and completely inappropriate housing conditions. Trent's phone contained dozens of downloaded videos about snake handling, but investigators noted that none of his saved content specifically addressed venomous species, safety protocols, or emergency procedures. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by envenomation from illegally possessed venomous reptiles. It was April 10, 2010, on the quiet outskirts of Brownsville, Texas, where the Rio Grande's backwaters met dense mesquite and palm. The humid air reeked of wet soil, and something massive waited silently in the brush. The small local nature park was known for its exotic reptile shows, a mix of native species and non-native rescues confiscated from the illegal pet trade. It wasn't a big-budget tourist attraction, but it had a loyal following among locals and curious travelers passing through. Families came for the turtles and harmless corn snakes. School groups visited to learn about conservation, but the star attraction was the park's prized Burmese python, a reptile unlike anything most visitors had ever seen. This python was a giant, nearly 18 feet long, weighing over 150 pounds, with scales patterned in gold, black, and olive that shimmered under the sunlight filtering through the pavilion roof. It had been rescued years earlier from a private owner who had purchased it as a hatchling, not realizing just how quickly it would grow into a predator capable of overpowering almost anything it could wrap itself around. Now, it lived in a large, reinforced enclosure, fed on a controlled diet, and handled only by experienced staff. At the center of it all stood Daniel Harris, a 41-year-old wildlife handler with over a decade of experience. Calm, charismatic, and comfortable in front of an audience, Daniel had performed this routine dozens of times. He had an easy smile, a practiced patter, and the kind of confidence that made people trust him, even with a predator just feet away. The demonstration began as it always did. Daniel spoke about the python's origins in Southeast Asia, how it had been introduced to the United States through the pet trade, and why it had become one of the most notorious invasive species in Florida's wetlands. For emphasis, he knelt beside it, sliding his hands beneath one of its coils to show the density of the muscle. The snake lay still, tongue flicking lazily in and out, its head resting motionless on the platform. Daniel turned back to the crowd, answering a child's question about its diet, explaining how pythons can go weeks, even months, without eating after a large meal. Then, in less than a heartbeat, the stillness shattered. The python's head shot forward with blinding speed, striking Daniel's side. The movement was so fast that many in the audience didn't register what had happened until they saw the coils whip around his torso like thick, living ropes. His breath caught in a sharp gasp. The first constriction forced the air from his lungs in a wheeze. The second crushed ribs with an audible crack. The third began to collapse his chest cavity entirely. Gasps and screams erupted from the audience. At first, a few thought it might be part of the show, until they saw Daniel's face flush deep red, his eyes wide with panic. His arms strained to push the coils away, but the snake had already locked them to his sides, the muscles beneath its patterned skin rippling with terrible efficiency. Two staff members rushed forward with metal poles, trying to wedge them between the coils and Daniel's body. One grabbed the snake's head, attempting to control it, but the python twisted violently, nearly knocking him off his feet. Another staffer shouted for the tranquilizer kit, his voice tight with urgency. Daniel's knees buckled. The python adjusted its grip with surgical precision, shifting its coils to sink deeper into his body. Another sharp crack echoed through the pavilion. His breathing grew ragged, his movements weaker with each passing second. Finally, a tranquilizer dart found its mark. The python's body rippled as the drug began to take effect. Its grip loosened slightly, just enough for rescuers to pry Daniel free and drag him onto the floor. He collapsed, motionless, his chest heaving in shallow gasps. Paramedics arrived within minutes to find Daniel with fractured ribs, collapsed lungs, and coil-shaped bruises. He was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery to repair the internal damage. He spent weeks in intensive care, haunted by nightmares of the crushing weight and breaking ribs. The python was placed under stricter protocols, and its public shows were canceled indefinitely. Daniel's family later released a short statement thanking the medical team and park staff for saving his life. They acknowledged that he had taken a calculated risk, one that nearly killed him, and that the incident had likely ended his career working with large constrictors. It was June 22, 2017, and the evening feeding routines at a small, privately run zoo outside Seattle were winding down as staff members completed their final animal care tasks of the day. The Pacific Northwest summer provided long daylight hours that allowed extended observation of animal behaviors, giving keepers valuable insights into the health and well-being of their charges. Sarah Mitchell moved quietly through the bear exhibit area, her veterinary training helping her assess the animal's conditions during the peaceful evening hours. At 28, Sarah had been volunteering at the zoo for 6 months while completing her veterinary studies at the University of Washington. Her gentle approach with animals and genuine passion for wildlife conservation had made her a valued member of the volunteer team, though her supervisors occasionally noted her tendency to bend established protocols when she believed it would benefit the animals in her care. Sarah's academic background gave her confidence in reading animal behavior and identifying potential health issues. The grizzly bear exhibit featured multiple viewing areas and service corridors that allowed staff to observe and care for the massive predators while maintaining safe distances. Sarah had been assigned to assist with evening feeding documentation, recording behavioral observations, and noting any changes in the bear's appetites or activity levels. The routine work provided valuable experience with large carnivores while contributing to the zoo's research and conservation efforts. Grizzly bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with adult females weighing between 400 and 600 pounds and possessing incredible strength and speed. These omnivores are naturally wary of humans, but can become extremely aggressive when they feel threatened or cornered. Captive grizzlies retain all their wild instincts and can inflict devastating injuries with their massive claws and powerful jaws, making strict safety protocols essential for anyone working near their enclosures. During her evening observations, Sarah noticed that one of the female grizzlies appeared to be favoring her right front paw, occasionally lifting it off the ground and examining it with obvious discomfort. Her veterinary training immediately focused on the potential injury, and Sarah moved closer to the public viewing area to get a better assessment of the bear's condition. The animal's distress was clearly visible, and Sarah felt compelled to gather more detailed information before contacting the veterinary staff. Against established safety protocols, Sarah used a staff access panel she had previously observed keepers use, allowing her to slip into the service corridor without proper authorization. The narrow walkway was designed for maintenance access and emergency situations, not for close observation of potentially injured animals. Sarah believed her veterinary background qualified her to make a preliminary assessment that could help the zoo's medical team respond more effectively. The injured grizzly noticed Sarah's presence in the restricted area and approached the fence line with obvious agitation. The bear's stress from her injured paw, combined with the unexpected human presence in a normally secure area, triggered defensive behaviors that Sarah failed to recognize in time. The 500-pound female began testing the fence barrier, her powerful claws and massive strength finding a section of secondary mesh that had been flagged for repair earlier in the week after storm-driven debris bent one of the support brackets. The damaged mesh panel partially collapsed, creating a narrow gap along the maintenance partition that allowed the injured grizzly to push through into the adjacent service corridor. The narrow space provided no escape route as the injured bear charged with explosive speed, her defensive instincts overriding any natural wariness of humans. Sarah's veterinary training had not prepared her for the reality of facing an aggressive grizzly in an enclosed space. The bear's massive paws struck Sarah with bone-crushing force, driving her against the concrete wall while claws raked across her torso and limbs. Once she was on the ground, the grizzly's powerful jaws clamped down on her head and neck, its weight pinning her to the floor of the corridor. The attack was driven by defensive instincts rather than predatory behavior, but the result was equally devastating. Zoo security arrived within minutes of the first emergency alert, but the confined space and the bear's continued aggression made immediate intervention impossible. The veterinary team deployed tranquilizer equipment, while other staff worked to create distractions that might draw the grizzly away from Sarah's motionless form. The injured bear eventually retreated to a corner of the enclosure, allowing rescue personnel to reach Sarah, but her injuries were already fatal. The incident prompted an immediate shutdown of the bear exhibit, while structural engineers and animal care staff conducted a full containment review. The zoo implemented stricter volunteer restrictions, new multi-step access controls, and reinforced strict maintenance protocols around large carnivore enclosures. It was May 17, 2018, and the rural construction site in Georgia buzzed with activity as heavy equipment cleared forested land for a new subdivision development. Tommy Rodriguez operated his bulldozer with practiced skill, pushing aside trees and brush to make way for the planned homes. The 26-year-old heavy equipment operator had been working construction for 8 years, but he had no training in wildlife encounters despite working in areas where dangerous animals were common. Tommy was known among his co-workers for his fearless attitude and willingness to handle situations that other workers avoided. He was supporting his pregnant wife and was eager to impress his supervisors to secure a promotion that would provide better benefits for his growing family. The construction site was clearing habitat that had been home to various wildlife species, displacing animals and forcing them into contact with human activity. The forested area being developed had been undisturbed for decades, providing ideal habitat for various snake species, including some of the most venomous in North America. The construction activity was destroying dens and hiding places, forcing snakes into the open, where encounters with workers became inevitable. Company safety protocols required workers to report wildlife sightings to supervisors, but these rules were often ignored in the rush to complete projects on schedule. Eastern coral snakes are among the most venomous species in North America, possessing a potent neurotoxic venom that attacks the nervous system and causes respiratory paralysis. They are secretive snakes that spend most of their time underground or hidden beneath logs and debris, making encounters with humans relatively rare. Coral snakes are often confused with harmless species, leading to dangerous misidentifications. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that cause progressive muscle paralysis, making immediate medical treatment essential for survival. Tommy was clearing brush with his bulldozer when the machine's blade uncovered what appeared to be multiple snakes sheltering independently under debris beneath a fallen log. Several snakes scattered as their hiding place was destroyed, but one coral snake appeared to be severely injured from the encounter with the heavy machinery. Tommy shut down his bulldozer to investigate, curious about the colorful snake he had uncovered. The coral snake lay motionless among the debris, its distinctive red, yellow, and black banding clearly visible in the afternoon sunlight. Tommy assumed the snake was dead, killed by his bulldozer during the clearing operation. He decided to pick up the snake to show his co-workers, thinking it would make an interesting conversation piece during their lunch break. Tommy reached down and grasped the coral snake with his bare hands, not realizing that the snake was only stunned and disoriented from its encounter with the bulldozer. The moment Tommy's hand made contact, the coral snake bit him on the palm, chewing for several seconds before its small fangs penetrated the skin and injected a dose of potent neurotoxic venom. Tommy dropped the snake and examined the small puncture wounds on his palm, initially dismissing the bite as minor due to the snake's small size. His co-workers gathered around as Tommy explained what had happened, but none of them recognized the serious nature of a coral snake envenomation. The rural construction site was 35 minutes from the nearest hospital, and the delay in seeking medical treatment would prove fatal. Tommy's co-workers called 911, but the remote location of the construction site delayed the arrival of emergency medical personnel. Initially, Tommy experienced only mild symptoms and continued working, believing the bite was harmless due to the snake's small size. Several hours after the bite, the coral snake venom began its deadly progression through Tommy's system. The neurotoxic poison attacked his respiratory muscles, making breathing increasingly difficult. Tommy's speech became slurred as the neurotoxins affected his neuromuscular function, and his vision became blurred. By the time paramedics arrived, Tommy was experiencing severe respiratory distress. Tommy was transported to the rural hospital, but the facility had delayed recognition of the situation, delaying his need for intubation. Without access to mechanical ventilation to assist his breathing, Tommy's condition rapidly deteriorated as the coral snake venom caused progressive respiratory muscle paralysis. Tommy died from prolonged hypoxia due to untreated respiratory paralysis, as the coral snake venom caused complete paralysis of his breathing muscles. The neurotoxic poison had specifically targeted his respiratory system, making it impossible impossible for his body to maintain adequate breathing. The small size of the coral snake had deceived Tommy into thinking the bite was harmless, but the potent venom had proved fatal despite the snake's diminutive appearance. The investigation revealed that Tommy had violated company safety protocols by handling wildlife without proper training or equipment. His death devastated his pregnant wife and led to mandatory wildlife safety training for all construction crews working in areas where venomous snakes were present. The incident highlighted the hidden dangers faced by workers in industries that disturb natural habitats. Tommy's tragic encounter with an eastern coral snake became a cautionary tale about the importance of proper wildlife training for construction workers. His death left behind a widow and unborn child, serving as a stark reminder that even small snakes can be deadly when not treated with proper respect. It was March 15, 2015, in the dense subtropical wilderness of Everglades National Park, Florida, and the morning mist hung heavy over the remote backcountry of the Big Cypress region. The humid air carried the sounds of awakening wildlife as the sun struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of bald cypress and pond apple trees. This isolated section of the park, accessible only by airboat or on foot through treacherous swampland, existed on the very edge of civilization, where modern life collided with ancient wilderness. The area sat precariously on the border of an expansive sawgrass prairie, where open wetlands met the untamed hammock forests in an uneasy truce. Narrow boardwalks and muddy trails, carved by decades of park rangers and researchers, wound between towering trees draped in thick Spanish moss and strangling air plants. The undergrowth teemed with insects, small mammals, and reptiles that thrived in the perpetual humidity beneath the canopy. The boundary between maintained park areas and true wilderness was razor-thin, marked only by a few scattered research stations built on elevated platforms and the occasional airboat channel cutting through the perpetually flooded landscape. Ancient cypress trees, some reaching heights of over 100 feet, their massive buttressed trunks forming natural cathedrals. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the gaps in the leaves, illuminating patches of forest floor covered in decomposing vegetation and standing water. Mariah Davis, a 37-year-old wildlife biologist and experienced field researcher, had spent the last 8 years studying invasive species impacts in South Florida's ecosystem. Born in Tampa during the 1980s, she had witnessed the gradual invasion of Burmese pythons into what was once a balanced subtropical wilderness. Her weathered hands, scarred by years of handling wild animals and navigating through sharp sawgrass, told the story of a life spent documenting nature's changes. Standing 5'6", with the lean build of someone accustomed to physical fieldwork, Sarah was known throughout the research community for her encyclopedic knowledge of Everglades ecology. She could identify native species, track animal movement patterns by observing environmental signs, and navigate the maze-like waterways even in low visibility conditions. Her trained eyes, sharpened by years of spotting camouflaged wildlife among dense vegetation, could detect the slightest movement in the undergrowth. As a lead researcher for the University of Florida's Invasive Species Monitoring Program, Sarah worked tirelessly to document the python population's impact on native wildlife. The data from her field studies, though sobering, provided crucial information for conservation efforts. Her daily routine during field seasons had remained consistent for years: rise before dawn, prepare research equipment, and venture into remote areas to conduct population surveys. At sunrise, Sarah set out on her scheduled monitoring routine. She prepared a simple field breakfast, gathered her research tools including GPS units, measuring tape, specimen containers, and a long snake hook, and set out along the familiar trail that led to her designated survey transect. The morning air hung thick with humidity, carrying the rich scents of decomposing vegetation and blooming wild orchids. Her research team anticipated her return by evening, just as she had unfailingly done during hundreds of previous surveys. Her field supervisor had reminded her the night before about a department meeting scheduled for the following week, where researchers would discuss recent python capture data that had been troubling the scientific community. Several teams had reported unusually large specimens in recent months, but such reports were becoming increasingly common and rarely caused alarm among experienced researchers. The Burmese python is one of the largest snakes in the world. Adult Burmese pythons caught in Florida average between 6 feet and 9 feet. The largest Burmese captured in Florida measured over 18 feet in length. These magnificent yet deadly creatures possess muscular bodies covered in intricate brown and tan patterns that provide perfect camouflage in the dappled light, filtering through forest canopies and marsh vegetation. Their hunting arsenal includes heat-sensing pits located along their lips, which detect the infrared radiation emitted by warm-blooded prey with remarkable precision. These thermal sensors allow pythons to hunt effectively in complete darkness, identifying potential victims by their body heat signatures. Their flexible skull structure, connected by elastic ligaments rather than rigid joints, enables their jaws to unhinge and expand to accommodate prey much larger than their normal head circumference. As the afternoon heat reached its peak and the swamp fell into its customary midday quiet, Sarah approached a particularly dense cluster of pond apple trees near a deep water slough. She had been working steadily since morning, her data sheets half filled with species observations, when she noticed an unusual disturbance in the water near a fallen cypress log. As she knelt down to examine what appeared to be python, shed skin caught on submerged branches, positioning herself within arm's reach of the water's edge. A massive Burmese python measuring over 18 feet in length and weighing approximately 180 pounds struck from its concealed position beneath the surface. The serpent had been lying motionless for hours, its heat sensors detecting Sarah's approach long before she became aware of its presence. The python's head, larger than a softball and armed with over 80 backward curving teeth, clamped down on her right shoulder with explosive speed. The first strike sank its sharp, needle-like teeth right through her field shirt and deep into the muscle underneath. Each tooth, designed specifically to prevent prey from escaping, created puncture wounds that immediately began bleeding profusely. The snake's powerful jaw muscles maintained their grip while the massive body began its deadly embrace. Within seconds of the initial strike, the python's muscular coils started wrapping around Sarah's torso, the first thick band encircling her waist with crushing force that immediately compressed her internal organs. The serpent's body, as thick as a telephone pole, continued wrapping around its victim with methodical precision. A second coil encircled her chest, compressing her rib cage and making breathing increasingly difficult. The python's muscular contractions created immense pressure, which began crushing internal organs and cutting off blood circulation to vital areas. A third coil wrapped around her legs, completely immobilizing her lower body. The python's weight, combined with the constricting force, brought both predator and prey into the shallow water, where the final phase of the attack continued with mechanical precision. The constriction process continued for approximately 10 minutes, during which the python maintained constant pressure while monitoring its victim's vital signs through vibrations detected along its body. As circulation to Sarah's brain became severely restricted, her movements became increasingly weak and uncoordinated. Her heart, unable to pump blood through the compressed circulatory system, began beating irregularly before eventually stopping altogether. The python maintained its crushing grip for several additional minutes after detecting the cessation of heartbeat and breathing, ensuring its prey was completely lifeless. Once satisfied that death was complete, the massive serpent began the methodical process of swallowing its victim whole. Starting with the head, the python's flexible jaw structure expanded to accommodate prey much larger than its normal head size. Powerful throat muscles, working in coordinated waves, pushed the body deeper into its digestive system over the course of nearly 3 hours. The snake's body stretched and distended as Sarah's form moved through its length, creating a distinctive bulge that would remain visible for days. Park rangers launched an extensive search operation after Sarah failed to check in via radio that evening. Search teams found the engorged python the following morning, its body distended to nearly twice its normal diameter and barely able to move. The distinctive bulge in the snake's midsection immediately revealed the horrific truth. The incident prompted immediate policy changes regarding solo fieldwork in python-inhabited areas and sparked renewed debate about invasive species management in Florida's protected lands. The University of Florida implemented new safety protocols requiring researchers to work in pairs when conducting surveys in high-risk areas. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.